worried that you might help get Donald Trump elected.
You can't have it be Trump, and you're going to help him if you take votes away from the Democratic candidate.
They risk electing Trump by voting for you instead of her.
Voting for a third-party candidate is a waste of their vote.
Third-party people would in fact get the best responses from the audiences. And people would say, you guys make a lot of sense. And then you go up to them and say, you're going to vote for us? And they say, oh, of course we're not going to vote for you. You can't win. You're going to vote for the Democrat. You're a much better candidate. Everything you're saying is true, but we can't waste our vote. Waste our vote is the expression. So if there's any term that drives me crazy, is this quote-unquote waste our vote.
So the one thing I can guarantee you is that our presidential candidates is the question you'll be asked most often, you can almost guarantee it, and every time you get on corporate television, is going to be the spoiler question. And so that's why we're having this workshop to talk about what is our response to the spoiler question. I'm John Andrews, I'm co-chair of the Presidential Campaign Support Committee. This is Justin Beth, who is co-chair of the Green Party and also works with the PCSC. So let's get started. We were delayed a little bit by the audio-visual problems. So let's just start through the slides. And so we're going to talk about the importance of the spoiler accusation. We're going to talk about the fallacies that are almost always inherent in the spoiler when somebody brings up the spoiler accusation. We're going to talk a little bit about how third parties defend democracy, and we shouldn't be hesitate about that. Justin is going to tell us a little bit about ranked choice voting, how and what happened in the state of Maine, how that came to be. If you'd like a copy of this presentation, you can give us your email address, and we'll send it to you by email. So let me I'll circulate this and just sign up here. Let's see how many of us. They're ready. There. You'll get copies of all the slides by
John, speak up. I'm sorry. We're going to video.
Okay, so why it's important, as we said, it's going to be, you're going to hear it constantly, and the corporate media has largely adopted it as being true. They try to get around this sometimes by saying, oh, people are saying, or somebody said you're a spoiler. I'm not saying it, somebody said this, and they keep repeating it. Yeah. Now, I'm saying I don't have much respect for people who do this. They want to pretend like they're journalists. They're not. A journalist, if something is debunked, does not keep repeating it again and again and again. A journalist just brings that into their coverage. But these journalists don't do that. They keep repeating the same debunked accusations. So the goal of this workshop is to leave you with some convincing fact-based responses that you answer the spoiler accusation is right. Next slide. So here's a very typical example. Let's play we can play this video of get you back to the best.
Earlier this week, radio host Dan Savage had this to say. I'm going to read the quote. You are essentially, if you're voting for Jill Stein, helping to potentially elect Donald J. Trump, President of these United States, which would be a catastrophe. How do you respond to that? Do you feel at all a sense of responsibility that your role may be indeed ultimately be that of spoiler in the race?
So, two things. One, I would feel terrible if Donald Trump gets elected, but I would also feel terrible if Hillary Clinton gets elected. Because Trump says horrific things. Hillary Clinton actually has a track record of horrific wars and regime change, of promoting the risk of nuclear war, in fact, over Syria, where she wants to start an air war with a no-fly zone with a nuclear-armed power. She's spread fracking around the world and helped contribute to this climate crisis. In my view, the most horrible thing of all is a voting system that says...
Okay, so you see Jill had one answer there, that the Democrat is not so great either, and so that's one answer, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So let's go back to the slides. Right. Okay, so that's one answer, and it's a good answer to keep in mind. This guy is some kind of a blogger online, so you know if they give him a lot of attention, like he's a real expert. And the journalist is not saying this is true, they're just saying other people are saying this is true. Okay, go to the next slide. So one thing that we need to remember to do is listen to how the question's asked and challenge the fallacies. And there are several fallacies, and we'll go into these in a little more detail. The vote transfer fallacy, that we could take all the green votes and transfer them over to the Democrat. And look how much better off the Democrat can be. I mean, I've seen elaborate spreadsheets made up where all the green votes, 100% of them, are transferred over to the Democrat. No other votes are transferred. And then you say, look how much better off the Democrat would have been without that elimination of competition, the idea that getting rid of third parties helps the Democrats. We're going to ask whether that's true or not. The lesser of two evil assertions that you can just vote for a Democrat, and since they're better than the Republicans, why do you need a Green? That we have a two-party system, that you really, it's two parties, folks. How dare you run somebody who's not in one of the establishment parties. And as long as we have two parties, and they're both arguing with each other fiercely and hurling insults at each other, we must have two choices, right? Not really true. And but elections are all about winning. It's just all about who's going to win. We've got two front runners here vying, for the win, and anybody else is just interfering with the process. So let's go to the next slide. First one is, when we look at exit poll, this addresses the question of this 100% transfer of the green votes over to the Democrat. If you look at what seems to be coming out of the exit polls that were conducted in 2016, of the people who voted for Jill Stein, 61% said they wouldn't vote at all if they had just had a choice of voting for Trump. So the main effect of the Green candidate is to bring people out to vote. We're increasing voter turnout. 25% said they'd vote for Clinton, and 14% said they'd vote for Trump. Well, yeah, Green voters would vote for the Republican if you didn't have the Green candidate in the race. And these are people that are just, kind of anti-establishment. Trump's anti-establishment. Jill Stein's anti-establishment. But they like Jill better, so they voted for Jill. But if you took Jill out, they go against the establishment by voting for Donald Trump. So when you add this together and say, well, what would be the effect? Let's just assume that Jill Stein, is totally taken out of the race, and the voters reacted this according to the polls. You get 2,500 more votes for Clinton, 1,400 more for Trump, and 6,100 fewer people voting. Now this, by the way, this affects all the down ballot races. All these progressive voters who come out and vote for the more progressive candidate, vote their values, and all the other races on the ballot, they're not there. So it really is a hit to any, if you believe in progressivism, it's really a hit when the Green isn't there to bring these voters out. Secondly, if you look at this, you subtract the 1,400 from the 2,500, that says that there could have been a net gain of 1,100 votes for Clinton. Of course, each election is different. But the 1,100, this is 10,000 votes. This is what the people who use the spoiler accusation almost always talk as if it's 10,000 votes. They say things like, oh, your votes were less than the margin of victory of Donald Trump in Michigan or something. But it really, they're off by 900%. It's 1,100 votes, not 10,000. So what's the difference between quoting math that's off by 900% and fake news? Okay, that's the difference. It's pretty much the same thing. So anyway, let's keep reminding people you can't just transfer votes. No, that's okay. I'm ready to go ahead.
Okay.
You move up. The second thing is they almost always never do all the transfers that you would have to do if you're going to eliminate third parties and just have a two-party system. They take the votes for Jill Stein, 1.4 million, and transfer them all up to Hillary Clinton and say, hey, isn't that great? But it's not clear. The Libertarians had 4.4 million, almost 3 times the votes of Jill Stein. Where are those votes going to go? I mean, Donald Trump has a really good chance of taking if he made an effort, he has a really good chance of getting those Libertarians to vote for him. And if you transfer these up to Donald Trump, he would actually benefit from the elimination of third parties, just having a two-party system. In fact, he would have won the popular vote if you do this transfer and transfer all the libertarians over to Trump. I don't know how many libertarian votes you can get. You have to make an effort. But so suppressing third parties doesn't necessarily help the Democrats. It can actually hurt them in some cases. So it's just not clear, if you try to exclude third parties, what your impact's going to be. And we're going to move quickly, but.
Did the libertarians also get the same backlash?
Yeah, they do. Although the media, I've noticed, is much more friendly to libertarians who are arguing the corporate points of view than they are to Greens. But yes, sometimes they get it, and any third party or independent will get this accusation. It's really amazing. The other thing is the fact that they tend to focus in on only one factor. Like Bush won Florida by 537 votes. That's just such a razor-thin margin. Anything could have flipped 537 votes in a state as big as Florida that has, 5 or 6 million voters. One thing you note is that of all and this is relative to the 2000 election, there were like 8 third-party candidates, and all of them had more votes than the difference between Bush and Gore in the end. So you could blame any of these candidates. You could take the Workers' World candidate and say, oh, Monica Moorhead lost Gore the election because if she hadn't been there, we had transferred all 1,800 votes she had over to Gore. Gore would have won. And you can play this game ad infinitum. It doesn't mean anything. I used to be a soccer coach for a kids' soccer team, and sometimes the kids would lose 9-8, and they would blame the goalie for that 9th goal. And we had to say, kids, stop right now. We're not going to blame the person who gave up the last goal, because the person who gave up the first goal is just as much to blame. We were in this. But yet, the Democrats often, they pick the Greens because the Greens are their competitors in a sense for progressive example. There also were 378,000 Democrats in Florida who voted for Bush, 4 times more than Nader received. So how often have you heard a Democrat say, we lost the election because of those darn voters, Democrats in Florida that voted Republican? I mean, there are 4 times more of them. So anyway, this is one of the fallacies of picking out one little factor and saying that costs the election. Next slide. And we'll say more about this later. Justin will have more comments about Florida and so on. There also are undervotes. Overvoting are people who get confused on the ballot and they vote twice for 2 candidates. There's undervoting. There are people that just, in Florida, there were 40,000 people who blanked the presidential race. They just skipped it. So probably you could say that 24,000 Democratic-leaning voters voted for third parties, but that's really one of the smallest factors in why Gore lost. Next. So anyway, this is a nice front page from the New York Post about the 2016 election. In that election, we had 2 of the least popular candidates we've ever had in our history. And when they asked people, why are you voting for Clinton? They said, because Gore is, I hate Gore, I'm voting. And they asked people who were voting for Trump, why are you voting for Trump? And they said, because Clinton is so terrible, I don't want to see her for 4 years. So people were doing a lot of voting against something. And when you have 2 choices, two-party system and 2 choices, it really means you have no choice. So the next slide sort of give you a feel for this. What happens, let's be the full spectrum of voters. And what tends to happen is the Republicans, the GOP, they take a position solidly on the right side of the spectrum, political spectrum. And the Democrats, using this principle that they consider a very smart principle called triangulation, they move over as close to the Republicans as they can get, but still have some area to dispute with them. And under this theory, and this is how the campaign managers operate, the Democrats now can have a chance of winning all of these votes by getting up very close to the Republicans. They don't lose any votes in the middle, any votes in this region. So, and an example, the Republicans are fighting a war. Bush's war, okay, he's sending troops over. The Democrats don't say they're against the war. they say, we want to set a deadline at which the troops' mission will be finished and they'll come home. And the Republicans say, no deadline, we'll just go keep them until the mission's over. And the Democrats argue, no, we want a deadline. That's the kind of debate you get between the two parties. Nobody will say the war was wrong, it's misconceived, that it's killing people for no reason. They say we got to finish the mission. And if you heard that ridiculous debate between Mitt Romney and Obama, President Barack Obama, on coal, where Mitt Romney said, "You're fighting a war on coal, and I'm going to stop it." And what did Obama say? Did he say, "Well, coal's, we can't afford to burn all this coal. It's destroying the planet. It's the fuel of the past"? No, he said, what are you saying? I'm not a friend of coal. I'm a real friend of coal. We're mining more coal now than we did when I started office. He defended coal. This is the debate you get with the Democrat and the Republican. Nobody is talking about all the voters here who really want to see the planet. So they call this triangulation. And the difference when the Democrats and Republicans are arguing, insulting each other, we got to point out to people that they're really arguing over who's going to be able to control this right-wing political system. And what happens every year is that the Republicans will move a little more to the right and the Democrats will go right with them. They'll still be arguing with each other, but they've moved the entire debate in our political system over to the right. So that's why we need third parties. When you put a Green Party here who's back in this part of the spectrum, suddenly all these voters are in danger of going green, and the Democrats have to go back, move a little more to the left, and really show something. So in Europe, this happens all the time. You have a more left party and a more right party, and those two parties kind of steer where the big establishment parties go. When the left starts gaining ground, this whole spectrum shifts a little bit more to the left. We don't have that in America because we've got a two-party subsistence system. Next slide.
Just a question. Triangulation because of those two triangles?
No, it's not a really good phrase, but what it means is you look at where your opponent is and you get over close to them, but just a little bit more toward the center than your opponent. They call that triangulation. Okay. It's like and I realize it's not a very good term, probably, but you'll see that term. So, okay. So the other thing that's sort of a fallacy that's put into the accusation often is this is all about winning, isn't it? Like, the reason we have elections is just to decide who wins. So Alicia Witt did this, oh, you only have 3 or 4%, so what's your role? You don't really expect you're going to win. And they use that to try to just discount giving any media coverage or anything to the people who don't appear to be in a position to win. But there's a lot of things that go in, and let's see if I have this slide. I can't remember if I checked this slide.
Yeah, I don't.
No, okay. So let me just say, yeah, I'll go back to that. So there are a lot of things that happen in an election other than who wins. Third parties historically have actually shifted the whole national debate, even when they didn't win, by introducing ideas, reforms, showing that voters support something. So voting is people's free speech. By having a third party there, they often say something. They say something important. This is important to the nation. There are also other reasons that we run, simply to ballot access, federal matching funds, other important things that third parties do, other than just winning. So we need to push back a little bit whenever we hear somebody in the news sort of says, it's all about these two front runners. The only thing the voters need is just get focused on them, right? No, that's a terrible system. We only have two people who are, and in fact, if one of the front runners gets a little bit ahead, so it looks like the other one doesn't have a chance to win, they won't toss out the coverage of that. It's happened to establish the party. Okay, next.
Would we be talking about a Green New Deal if it wasn't for the Green Party?
That's right. The Green New Deal, universal health care, all these write-ins introduced by Jill Stein in her 2016 race. And now at least some of the Democratic candidates, not the one that's in the lead, but some of the more progressive districts are talking about all these things that wouldn't be talking. You can go back in history, things like just labor unions and Social Security and all of those were put on the table by third parties running political races and scaring the establishment enough that they made a concession. Okay. Anyway, I guess we've covered most of these. Yeah, the two-party system, I think one of the later slides will cover this, but it really is something we should be opposing. Anytime somebody says there's just two parties, we can say that's the problem. That's the problem. And we have two parties, they both represent Wall Street. There's no voice in the race that represents the people. Okay, go to the next one. And okay, this is just the point we were making before. Jill called for cancellation of student debt and tuition-free higher education. And what do we see? And the Democrats poo-pooed that idea. Oh no, that would be too expensive. That's not feasible. That's not practical. You're so impractical. And this year, what do we see? All the liberal bloc of Democratic Party candidates are now talking about this. And I give credit to Bernie Sanders too for pushing them into this, but certainly Jill was a factor. Green New Deal, universal single payer, legalization of marijuana. Oh, that crazy green, with this crazy far out idea of legalizing marijuana. We don't want to cover her. Well, all the Democratic candidates now are supporting legalization of marijuana. 4 years later, Jill Stein isn't so crazy anymore. And people don't usually know about this. She called for negotiation with North Korea. She said North and South Korea can actually negotiate this crisis down. We don't have to go over there and unleash a nuclear war with them in order to solve it. And the leader he talks crazy, but the South Koreans say they can negotiate with him, and we should be encouraging them to do so. And the Democrats all said, "Oh, that's crazy. He's a madman. We have to get the Sixth Fleet to go sailing over there and fight him." Jill's right. And remember, the Democratic Party is a protector of Wall Street privilege all the way. They can't be allowed to be the only voice to question the Republicans. Next slide.
So yeah, this is where I think I'd be connected.
Okay, so I'm going to let Justin talk a little bit more about the spoiler issue as it applies to particular races and race voting.
And I wanted to start off, and first of all, thank you, John, for letting me add to this conversation here. I do a lot of online commenting on people, challenging people about the spoiler effect, splitting the vote, a two-party system, and I use a lot of air quotes when I say all of those things. So I want to talk a little bit about the two-party system, because a lot of times when I'm getting into these conversations, they're like, well, it's only a two-party system, and that's just the fact. Our system is a two-party system. Well, so we have a plurality system, right? That's first past the post voting system. And Duverger's law it's more a theory, but that's related to plurality voting, that that only leads to a two-party system. You have a winner and you have a loser. And you can, otherwise, those other parties are just going to split the vote, spoil it, whatever. But there's other countries out there with plurality voting, such as United Kingdom, India, Australia, Canada. All those have more than two-party representation. So when they tell you that it's a two-party system, tell them it's just the same as a voting system over in United Kingdom. And they got more than two parties there, right? They got the Labour Party. Don't buy it. So what's the difference here? We got money in politics. There's Citizens United. We got corporately owned ruling parties that don't let us into the debates. They own the debates. They own the media. So challenge them on that. Don't allow them to just say it's a two-party system. And Republicans don't always win. We got Angus King, who was first elected governor in Maine as an independent, and America's favorite senator, Bernie Sanders, was an independent. He's running with the Democrats now, but he won elections as an independent. And there have been others. We had this gentleman in Maine I'm going to talk about a little bit, Elliot Cutler. He didn't quite win. Back in 2010, and the reason why I want to cover this is because this kind of ties into why we actually fought for ranked choice voting in Maine. So the candidates, Paul LePage, everybody remembers Paul LePage because he actually won, and we hated him. He was our trumpet mate. Libby Mitchell, who was that? Well, that was the Democrat. They never remember Libby Mitchell. They remember the next guy, Elliot Cutler, who was the independent in the race. We also had, you see it, three other, a couple other independents, and we had a bunch of others. So the results there you see, 37.6% went to LePage, 35.9% went to Elliot Cutler, this independent. Libby Mitchell, only 18% of the vote. Sean Moody, 5%, others, 1.8. So a couple of things I'd like to say here. First of all, before going into the election, how could somebody say, well, we really don't want LePage, Well, okay, well, we gotta go with the Democrat. Well, the Democrat vastly underperforms in this race. But how would you have known that before the election? There's no way you could have known. And ultimately, I have here on the bottom, who gave us Paul LePage? Well, it was Elliot Cutler, but not because he spoiled the election, because he split the vote, because clearly he didn't split the vote. It's because his campaign failed to win over enough of the uncommitted voters. If he won over those the 1.8% there, 10,396 votes, it would have put him ahead of LePage. So this is one of the things I want to say is that the spoiler, the one that did not win, it's all on them. And I'll kind of cover that in a couple more slides here. So
I would say Mr. Mitchell was the spoiler.
Or Miss Mitchell, yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah. And also point out again here, so you probably already saw this there, the most successful third party in American history, right? We could talk, there's some other, very successful third parties, right? The Woman's Party. But the Republican Party won it with Abraham Lincoln in 1860. It led to the Civil War, the assassination of Lincoln. It led to a revolution, essentially a revolution to abolish slavery. So some big things can happen in these realignment elections. So they can happen, there's a precedent for it. And we should say, we should run these elections. So who's really to blame? We talked about Gore earlier, and this slide here is great, right? Where, it has those undervotes, the people that left the blank, I'll talk a little bit more about that. And just point out here that the Democrats who vote Republican, 378,000 votes, that counts doubly. It's doubly more damaging to the Democrats than those Greens or the Dems that voted Green. Because that's taking a vote away from Gore and giving it to Trump. Whereas this would just take it away from Trump, Gore, Bush. Get all my presidents straight. So it would be taking a vote away from Bush Gore and not giving it to Bush. Okay, so you guys know what I mean. I think I was missing my presidents there. Okay, so what about Clinton? Who's to blame there? Well, I'm going to say she was a lousy candidate and she had a lousy campaign team. And there's, that's good, that's good. So the gap between Clinton and Trump, there was 10,000 votes there. I'd like to point out this race in Michigan for some reason. 10,000 votes. Jill Stein got 50,000 votes. Whoa, she could have, given those votes to Clinton and called it a day. But then Garrett Johnson, again, if you do that whole transfer of libertarians to Republicans, 150,000 votes. Okay, but then you had 90,000 votes that were undervotes, far more than Jill Stein, so they didn't vote for anybody on ballot, right? They went out and voted for everybody else on the race, but so all Clinton had to do was win 11% of those undervotes, and she would have won that. So again, I put the onus on the campaign, and you got a question there?
Yes. Why have blame at all?
Well, that's a really good point, and I think, maybe we could talk about that a little bit more at the end. Let's save that. But so one thing I want to point out with these undervotes, by the way, is besides people that just don't bother to fill in anybody for president, that might have been, and I think this is around the country, we should try to look at this. how many people actually wrote in Bernie Sanders, where he was not an eligible candidate to be a write-in candidate in that state? I think they tossed those votes out and it appears as undervotes.
Oh, do they appear as undervotes?
I think in
The
some states,
write-ins are undervotes?
well, write-ins where they're not registered to be a write-in candidate. So in Michigan, Bernie Sanders, like if he didn't register to be a write-in candidate and somebody voted Bernie Sanders, it counts for nothing.
That's true in a lot of states.
So I think that's an interesting thing with those undervotes. You know, you see those undervotes, are those people that voted Bernie Sanders and just didn't count for crap?
But does that disqualify the entire ballot with the local election?
No, yeah, it does not.
Okay.
So going on, Democratic campaign team believe that their own phony polling, so that's the emails, WikiLeaks, right? They talked about the polling that they were rigging for, you know, to make them look good. And they believed their polls about Michigan saying that Clinton was ahead by like, 4 or 5%. The campaign dismissed the Dems that warned that they were falling behind Michigan. In the last couple of weeks, Clinton spent $2 million in states like Arizona and Texas that they were never going to win the electoral college votes from. So that's a bad campaign strategy. So again, I would, rather than blame, I would recommend that the Democrats look in a mirror before they blame the Greens or anybody else. Because people do have a right to vote as they see fit. Okay, so, and then Biden, who knows? But I just want to point out here, they've been having a significant amount of losses here over the last few years, since 2009 to 2017. 63 U.S. rep seats, 11 U.S. Senate seats, 14 governor seats, and about 1,000 state legislative seats. And there wasn't a Green running in every single one of those races. That's a track record. That's a trend. See ya. Okay. Okay, so with some additional takeaways, again, actual voting data. Ask them, if somebody's saying, oh, I heard about, they spoiled the election, or they split the vote. Ask them to give you an example. Take a look at the data with them, and the data doesn't back it up. Always go to the data. Use examples. The spoiler is not always a third party or an independent candidate. Sometimes it's a Democrat. Again, we look at that case there with 2010 gubernatorial election in Maine. Democratic Party often nominates inferior candidates and runs lousy campaigns. 2020 we could be looking. I believe we're looking at a repeat of 2016, where they're going to give us Biden. Lousy campaign. Right now they're touting Biden as the more electable candidate too, but they did the same thing for Clinton. And how well did that work? Third party independent candidates can and do win elections, right? And sometimes in a big way. Granted it was the Civil War, it was, 1860s, Abraham Lincoln, and you see what kind of change that made. We do need ranked choice voting and electoral reforms to make election results more democratic. So talk a little bit about, there's no such thing as a spoiler. The candidate campaign that loses the election only has itself to blame, and maybe I should take out that word blame. I like that. Okay, so Democratic teachers, ranked choice voting, winners elected by majority by plurality, okay? In Maine, we've been fighting for ranked choice voting, and we have it for federal races, and we have it for party primaries, but it doesn't count, we have it in some cities for like a mayoral race, but it doesn't count for state rep, state legislator, governor races, it's state races essentially. So we have more work to do there. But anyways, it reflects more genuine voter sentiment. We're familiar with ranked choice voting. We use it here in our internal processes. No matter how many candidates are on the ballot, no one has to be forced on the ballot to avoid vote splitting. And it allows for more parties without fear voting, so voting out of fear. And in fact, that's one thing I'm always telling people I talk to political conversations. We got to stop voting out of fear. It's time to create a ballot box. And it increases voter turnout, which helps those down-ticket races. So there's actually a huge advantage. In 2020, we're planning to run a U.S. Senate race in Maine with ranked choice voting. And because of that, we're going to we're facing off against Susan Collins and a Democrat. And there's a couple out there that are interested in running for the Democrats as well. And so Susan Collins is going to be tough to beat. But with a Green in the race and a Democrat, that's going to, the voters on the left are going to come out, and more independents are going to come out to vote for one of those two, and chances are the votes are going to transfer between those two. That's going to make it more likely to be Susan Collins in the end.
Right.
And it's going to help out all those down ticket races too. I have here electoral college reform, and change it from a winner-take-all system. You know, we could have debates on should we abolish the electoral college. You know, that's maybe an interesting conversation to have. But if we just taken, I'd like to go back to the slide kind of, but you know, basically in Florida in 2000, if we split up the electoral college votes like we do in Maine, where we give one per congressional district, and then the overall winner of the state gets 2 for this, basically their senators. The results of that race, it would have been a, Bush won 15 congressional seats, and there's 23 congressional seats in Florida. And then you add the 2 for, so basically the electoral college results would have been 263 for Bush, 274 for Gore. Gore would have won the election if they split the electoral college vote like they do in Maine or Nebraska. So, and then get money out of politics. You know, overturn Citizens United, publicly fund elections, and boycott Democrats and Republicans. You know, I have to tell people, if you lean to the right, go ahead and go libertarian. If you're with us on the left, come green. Boycott those, you know, corporate parties, and we'll be a lot better off. Get money out of politics by boycotting those. And I think that kind of gets us back to your last slide here, your conclusion.
Yeah, I'm just looking back now. Thank you, Justin.
Yeah.
That was very, very nice. And so what are we saying in the end? In the end, we have to step up as Greens and just point out that anyone who's trying to push the spoiler argument is actually attacking the voters. They're attacking the rights of voters to have their vote mean something. And so, let's see, okay, another conclusion slide I changed. Jackie?
I just wanted to add to what Justin said, that something that's really important for everybody to understand, and I've been telling Democrats this for a really long while. The Democratic Party in the presidential elections and also in the gubernatorial elections, because they want to own all the states, they will put their money and effort into the most conservative candidate. And so in most states, for governor, the progressive Dems are the ones pushing the vote, and they will work for the progressive candidate. But it's the non-progressive that wins. Ergo, third parties have a really good chance to get in on states, because the Democrats are stupid enough to keep putting in the conservatives that the majority of progressive Dems don't want. So that is an important factor for us to also understand.
That's how Mitt Romney won in Massachusetts.
It's really important. That's what they do. They've never put a progressive in for a presidential candidate.
Favored by their incumbents.
It's really important.
Voters. So anyway, the spoiler tactic is really just a tactic. It's based upon fallacies. It's used to eliminate competition and to bully voters into surrendering their free speech. So our message to voters is, don't surrender your free speech. If someone starts giving you the spoiler thing, you should be incensed. They're trying to take away your freedom to vote for what you really want and convince you to vote against yourself. And that you should view that as an insult as soon as you hear the spoiler argument trying to be pushed upon you. And if you don't vote for what you want, when will you ever get what you want? Who's ever going to defend you? Once you become a reliable spoiler voter who always votes the lesser of two evils, they can carry this system all the way over to the right. And before long, you'll be told that, you know, the Republicans want to have all the workers be beat with 8-foot bullwhips when they go to work to get more out of them. And the Democrats they're all opposed to that. They only want 5-foot bullwhips at the maximum. and so Jill Stein says it very well. She says, when you vote out of fear, it gives you everything you fear in the end. Everything you fear. It's an attack on our constitutional rights to run for office. You know, you hear Democrats sometimes talk about, oh, we want everybody to have we want voter turnout. We want everybody to have a right to vote, which is not really true, but that's their rhetoric. But what about the right to run for office? I mean, isn't that also guaranteed by our Constitution? There's nothing in the Constitution that says only 2 parties shall have the right to appear on the ballot. I mean, you know, we're talking about very, you know, and the example I give is in Saddam Hussein's Iraq. They expected everybody to vote. They got 92%, 95% turnout. If you didn't vote, they looked upon you suspiciously. But when you got in the voting booth and you took your ballot and you were ready to cast your vote, there was only one name on the ballot for you to vote for, Saddam Hussein, okay? And so if they can control who gets to run, they've effectively taken away the value of the vote and taken away our democracy. So we've got to really insist that we have a right to run, to be on the ballot, to be in the debates. And it's the 2-party system that's really undermining America's democracy. That's why we're marching to the right. That's why people are apathetic and don't even bother to go to vote. We've really got to replace it with a healthy multi-party system. And we shouldn't let the big parties, the supporters of establishment journalism and the establishment corporate press is working hand in glove with them to try to drive our system into a 2-party system that moves to the right. But we've got to fight this. So to defend our political rights, reject the spoiler tactic, vote your conscience, it's your free speech, and, well, demand electoral reforms, the main one being ranked choice voting, which solves the spoiler problem. So I think that's it.
Yeah.
Okay. Now we're just going to open it up for discussion. If people have something they want to add, I'm sure they do. And we've got about 15 minutes. And again, I don't know where the notebook's over here. So if you sign that, you'll get a copy. So I'm just going to start. A few more people are over here raising their hands. Let me start with the lady who was first back there, and then I'll come up with this.
I also think this whole thing is there to split progressives, because I don't know about other people, but I have a lot of friends who are progressive Democrats, and sometimes I get this from them. So it's really also used to put something in between just ordinary people who have the same ideas.
Yeah. That's right, like single-payer health care. Oh, that's a crazy idea, you know, only the Greens are advocating that. You know, and so, yeah, you take progressives and prevent them from voting. Yeah, okay, sorry.
I think proportional voting is even more important than ranked choice voting, because you can take what is in effect now, a presidential race is limited to 10 or 11 or 12 swing states, and actually make it a national election, which we've never ever had in this country. Yeah. And you don't have to deal with that problem of the small states wanting to hold on to their extraordinary representation they get through the Electoral College. Let them keep that, but spread the vote between multiple candidates, and we have an opening we can walk through.
Yeah, that requires a little more discussion. We ought to have a workshop on that. Okay, who else? I was going right to left here. I think I can get through everybody.
Right to left.
So I've been studying the media for a while, and I was curious myself about the horse race and everything else. I looked into some of my university's best news databases, and I found nothing except for about car spoilers. I had to delete that. With car spoilers. Before 1999, there was nothing about a spoiler effect anywhere before 1999 in the news. The first article I found was speculation that Ross Perot had cost the Republicans their election, and would Nader do the same? And that was speculating for the 2000 election. And then I looked at their chart of how many articles contained maintain the spoiler effect between 1999 and now. And like, it was steadily raising, and it fell a little while during the Obama years. And all of a sudden, this huge spike in 2016.
We should have a graph on that. I'll bet it's
Yeah, so it's very interesting that even though there's only been about 8 elections that didn't have third-party candidates in presidential races, we all of a sudden have thought that maybe the third parties have been spoiling everybody this whole time. And how odd that seems. So that's very interesting to me, but whenever I talk to people, I try and keep it a moral issue that this is supposed to be a democracy. Do we actually care about that everybody being allowed to vote for who they want to and being allowed to run in the elections like we were guaranteed by the Constitution? Or do we want to have this horse race politics where you have to have $1 million to run for the governor's office? Because that's the average cost of a governor's race. So are we buying the governor's office or are we running for governor?
That's a good point. And the media, watching the media is important, so I'm glad you brought that up. And the other thing is that when they analyzed the media coverage in 2016, 50% of every article the media wrote was about the horse race. It's about, oh, Clinton seems to have gained 2% points, you know. So, and the thing that does, that's really degenerate journalism because it focuses the attention on these fluctuating poll numbers that don't really mean too much. And it also focuses attention on the Democrat and the Republican, because if you're just covering who's edging ahead among the front runners, you certainly don't, what's the point in interviewing somebody who's third party? I mean, even though they may have better ideas.
And you mentioned the key word too, propaganda. It's propaganda. It's not news. It's not media. It's not really informing the public. It's propaganda. Yeah.
Yeah. Now there are some hosts on, especially on the internet talk shows, who are very good about interviewing third parties, and it's the most informative coverage of the issues you'll get. And when they talk to Clinton or Trump, it's just ridiculous kinds of irrelevant discussions. Okay, I'm going to go here.
So we were talking about electoral reform obviously needs to happen. I'm going to piggyback off what you said on the more electoral systems. Now, how does RCV, in your opinion, meet up with AV? Like which?
So, I mean, approval voting, definitely something that is talked about as, we've actually talked about it in our own internal elections a little bit. It seems like a great voting system. Yeah, we should, we clearly have a system that does not work. We should be we should be looking at other countries, other models of voting systems that do work better for more democratic representation, more parties, and more voices in. I mean, we bill ourselves as a democracy, right? we love democracy here, but we don't really practice that. And I think, again, we look to other countries, we should be looking to other countries for single-payer healthcare and other solutions like this, and also for electoral reforms, I think. So.
I've done some interesting studies of approval vote, all the different ways of voting by taking the same elections and then running it to see who would win under all these different systems. It's kind of interesting to see. I mean, sometimes it doesn't make much difference, in who wins. I mean, I personally would have a hard time with the voting system, approval voting, that had me say Hillary Clinton and Jill Stein are equal. I really want to say no. Jill Stein is my number one. Now, after I vote for Jill Stein number one, you could make the argument to me that I should put in number two for Hillary because she's better than Trump. Okay, but I certainly don't want we can talk about this way and see. Okay, go next.
And I would say, when it comes to media coverage, it's not fair. It goes to the people who get the most money, and people on the left and the right both distrust polls, but then they want to to say they should use the polls to decide who gets into the debate. I mean, it's just totally illogical.
Yeah, remember
the
Jill
debate.
said that the debate should drive the polls, not the other way around. Let the voters hear the candidates, and then that should determine how the polls come out. And we're doing it the other way around. Candidate has a least name recognition, never gets be seen. So,
yeah, I mentioned the Electoral College. It's interesting that since Florida, the Democrats have never raised that as any kind of a serious issue, and I think we ought to be pointing that out. It's working perfectly the way it was set up by the founding white male patriotic fathers. So is the Senate, and we don't talk about there should not be a Senate.
True.
The Senate is the House of Lords.
Yes.
And it's functioning perfectly
I get
again.
that.
So I think I'm so glad you did this, John. And we need a whole campaign on democratic elections. And we have to confront the Bernies and the Ocasio-Cortez and all these people about our rights and democratic elections. And John coined a terrific phrase. He said, instead of voter suppression, we have to talk about party suppression. And that nails it. It really nails it. The last thing I want to say and suggest, I'm on the outreach committee, the National Outreach Committee. This is so important that I think we ought to think not only of material that we can get out everywhere, taking the main points of what the work you've done, we need a brochure on the whole topic.
Absolutely. I've been working on something which I didn't quite get ready in time for this, but I call the spoiler resource book, which sort of like, it has all the references, it has all the arguments, and it's not intended to be like you give this to voters to read, but it's for like candidates to read, and then they pick out the facts, and then they put it into the brochures.
But we need to put it out to the
And then we can have
public.
that graph.
Yeah, I know.
It's in their brain.
How they created this.
You know.
And those products have to be tailored and right. And some things are, some things are difficult to explain to people, so they don't like in the middle of a campaign, you can't stop and like go into extremely complicated subjects sometimes. So you got to figure out what can you get across quickly. We do need that material that we can use, and every candidate should use it. All of our candidates will say something to reject the spoiler, but they don't always have all the arguments sort of lined up neatly, and that's one reason we're doing this workshop. And probably these slides we will improve. So I'm going to go this way. Then
I was just going to say too, there's something there. Go ahead. Yeah, go on.
So I'm going to stay right here.
Yeah, my philosophy, when somebody says that, is basically our country's problems, all our country's problems go down to the money politics, which is the corporate sponsored government we have. So when I go to vote, why would I be supporting our problems and vote for a corporate sponsored candidate? I'm going to be voting for anybody that's not taking money. That's my philosophy. And the other part is basically the people that don't vote, which I think is about 40% of people don't vote nowadays. And if you ask them why, it's because they'll tell you we're for. You know, we get the same no matter who we vote for. We're getting corporate sponsored candidates. So why should we vote for the problem? Why don't we fight against it?
Yeah, good point. Matt?
I remember when I was a kid, like 7th grade, and you're learning about the evil Soviet Union. Now they have elections with only one candidate. And I raised my hand and said, but we only have 2 candidates. But there are people in this country that believe that the 2-party system is in the Constitution. You Greens, you're not allowed to run it. We live in a 2-party system.
Right.
And I hate to tell you, but the first time I ran for office, which was 40 years ago, for my borough council, I had a lot of people come, Mark, you're a smart kid, you got a lot of good ideas, but I don't want the Republicans to win. Or, Mark, you're a smart kid, you got some great ideas, but I don't want the Democrats to win, so I gotta vote for the Republican. So that the spoiler thing was even there in a tiny little town with, 800 voters.
Okay, and back row, Matt.
Yeah, I think people raised some really good ideas. I think that I'm glad that somebody mentioned proportional representation. I think maybe that would be one way to radically reform the Senate. I'm a little nervous about saying that a candidate needs a majority to win, but in legislative races, because I think we can see that the Greens as Greens were like a mass movement really, but we may not have 50% in any one particular district. I don't think that our politics necessarily are defined by where we happen to live. In Massachusetts, we have Green voters in urban areas and we have Green voters in rural areas, and they may be coming to us for different reasons, but I think we have that kind of broad appeal statewide that might not be reflected if every race is a majority elected race. Just like a couple things that I think are good talking points. If people are voting out of fear, then it's not really, a democracy is people power. It's the power of the people to express, to run the government. And so if you're voting out of fear, you're really giving up that power to whoever's scaring you. So when people give you the fear argument, you got to say, well, who's scaring you? Because that's who you're giving up your power to, and it's usually these Wall Street Democrats, right? And really, if you think about my last point, it's just like that triangulation thing where it's going to the right. You've got to think that it's kind of it kind of looks symmetrical on paper. Like, why aren't they going to the left? Like, why aren't the Democrats stealing all of our great ideas and the Republicans are trying to catch up with them, right? Like, if we had if you're really committed to the two-party system, hey, that wouldn't be so bad if you had two Green parties that were, fighting about who had the better plan to address the climate crisis. So then I might not be so, down on a two-party system. The problem is that the system is fundamentally run by money, and that, it's really the people on Wall Street who are behind the engine behind this system. So I think it's good to always just kind of throw that in there to remind people why, where power is really seated.
Yeah. Okay. Going this way.
First, I want to thank you for that fact about the polling of the 10,000 voters in the 2,000. That's a great retort for when you get asked that question. Well, 6,000 of those people wouldn't even have voted if there wasn't a choice. But the other thing I wanted to mention was Justin was talking about success in other countries, and I think other people have kind of gotten at the problem that in other countries, some other countries, you don't vote for a candidate, you vote for a party. You vote for a set of ideas. And unfortunately in this country, the focus is on personalities, rather than issues.
Passionate conservatives really well.
More like stuff like that. So, I think it's kind of hard to correlate how it's going to work. In this country and what we need to do about it.
Okay, are we all okay?
Well,
Tim, do you want?
I think it was an excellent presentation, but I think one thing that was left out is, the 5%. If we get 5%, for example, in the presidential race, a lot of Greens don't know this. We would have, like $17 million for the next presidential election. Imagine if we had even 10 million, if we had $1 million ready for the next president. So it's like, why? Okay, it's a protest vote of 3% or 5%. A 5% is a win in some ways. 5% means, you establish, on a national scale, on a very credible, logistic way, a national party with money, that sort of stuff. So I would just like to encourage people love victories, unfortunately. A 5% is a victory.
It certainly is. Okay, listen, we've got another workshop supposed to start here in 10 minutes, and you have to get through your nice workshop.
Can I